and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, hi, my name's Lena. I talk about capitalism, consumerism, books, feminism, whatever, but today I'm talking about books. I have had a great start to my 2019 reading year. I've read 10 books so far, and today I wanted to tell you about 5 of my favourites. The first one is Nutshell by Ian McEwan. I listened to this in audiobook. Now, I was interviewing Ian McEwan on stage at London Book Fair this year, and I was hella nervous, and I wanted to read some of his backlist titles that I hadn't read yet, and one of them was Nutshell. Nutshell came out about 3 or 4 years ago. It is a retelling of Hamlet, told from the perspective of an unborn baby in a fetus. Now, there are so many things about this that could have gone wrong and went so right. I think that, especially when you're playing to quite a well-read literary audience, it's hard to not fall into cliches or exhausted tropes of Shakespeare retelling. Ian McEwan skillfully navigates round those things in a really unexpected way. The tone, it's told in first person, the tone is so dry, and I found this book I actually found it unexpectedly funny. I wasn't expecting when I picked up the book or downloaded the audiobook that I was going to find it so bloody hilarious. But the structure is quite winding, but it has all these unexpected corners. And because for a reader who's familiar with Hamlet, there's a danger of being like, and then they, and as you know, at the end this happens. There wasn't any, the foreshadowing was very subtle. The way new information was revealed genuinely felt new, even though you kind of know what's going to happen. The way he reframed and reset the story meant that it felt so new that you genuinely were wondering whether certain people died and certain people didn't. The ghost element of it was short and tight and not too drawn out or overplayed. It still felt within the tone of realism in the book. The tone of voice of the main protagonist, the unborn fetus, is hilarious because he's done it in this way. Because again, how do you even talk in first person from a person who isn't a person yet? Who's never spoken, who has no grasp of language supposedly. But he comes from this idea that a fetus has the ability to be as intelligent as his mind is stretched to be. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the closest comparison for the protagonist in my reference point is Bernie from Watch My Chops. An unnaturally hyper-intelligent fetus that still doesn't have all the reference points of actually having lived, which is where the humour comes in. But basically the fetus will listen in on his mum's podcast. So his mum will go to sleep with podcasts and audiobooks in her ears every night, and the fetus stays up and actually listens to these TED Talks and podcasts and learns about the world that way, and also through listening to the mum interact in an intellectual way with people. And he has these incredible insights into his hopes for humanity, what he thinks the world might be, what it actually might be, and he overhears his mum talking about giving him up for adoption, and he is horrified that he might have to live in a high rise with a buzz cut and never get to read as a child. And it's just so absurdist and laughs at the class system. I would really recommend listening to the audiobook because it is one of those ones you want to wash over you and hear the tone at which I think Ian McEwan wants you to hear it at. Atonement is probably still my Ian McEwan favourite novel because I'm basic like that, but Nutshell is so up there. Oh my god, unexpected fave. I know a lot of you are waiting for my verdict on the new Mhairi McFarlane, and spoiler alert, I fucking loved it yet again. Is anybody surprised? Mhairi McFarlane is one of my favourite authors of all time. She writes chick lit. It's not chick lit. She writes intelligent rom-coms that are marketed to female readers, but can be for anyone, and give you all the tropes that you'd be expecting. So the same with Jane Austen novels. If at the end the person you wanted to get together with the heroine didn't get together with the heroine, you'd be like, Jane, you have lied to me. This is a betrayal of every bit of trust we've ever had. She does write to that format, but around that format she gives comments on the Me Too movement, the subtle abusiveness that can come about in relationships, the dichotomy of somebody who's in their 30s who knows that achievement and success is a constructed lie, but also struggles to hold on to her self-esteem when people criticise her for being almost 30 and still working in a pub because she wants to be a writer. Anyway, so it follows this main character who vaguely wants to be a writer, doesn't know what she wants to do, but has been in various different service jobs during her 20s and feels looked down upon by people around her, even though she's pretty cool and funny. She's just come out of a horrendous relationship with a famous fictional stand-up comic who's been on stuff that looks like it could be 8 out of 10 cats. He's a horrendous person. She's trying to untangle herself from him. She has this memory of this guy that they almost were like they were together, and then like something horrible happened, and then they never spoke to each other again. She always remembers him every time she breaks up with somebody, and she's broken up with this comedian, and she's like, fuck this, and then she gets fired from her job, and her life's just like a bin fire. It's her finding her feet again. It's her getting hired by two Irish brothers, who turns out one of the brothers is the guy that she used to go out with in high school, and he is either pretending not to remember her or has amnesia and definitely doesn't remember her. And it's beautiful, and it's really about the main character's journey to self-actualization and confidence. And I just love it. Like her turns of phrase, the way she writes is so tight, and it's set in Sheffield. It has all the witticisms and turns of phrase that I love about Northern people. It's also about her relationship with her mum and her sister, and how like her feminism interacts with that, and how like her mum's expectations from her life are because of her own experiences. I just love her writing. More rom-coms with wish fulfillment and hot Irish men, but also comments on abusive relationships, the Me Too movement, and working class experiences. Yes. Next, I read The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas. I wanted to bring this up because I think it's probably not going to make my top 10 of the year. I did really enjoy it, but I wanted to show you guys that it existed, because I think it's a really original concept and a really interesting book. So it starts in 1967. 4 women are working on a remote farm with a minimal amount of funds, trying to solve the problem of time travel. They become really close in this time. They like operate as a unit. They become like sisters, and they eventually do, no spoilers, invent time travel. We skip ahead and see the power dynamics of how a time travel organization has expanded, grown, solidified around the government and the rest of the world, and how time travel is trying to normal to some people now. And we also see how those 4 friendships have played out in the face of one of the most public facing successes in human history. It's kind of like the men who went to the moon times a million. Essentially, it follows one character trying to solve a mystery, but throughout that you learn about what happened to the 4 women. It's got lots of BAME characters, it's got some beautiful lesbian relationships, and it has that intersectional element to it without being like, hi, I'm an intersectional book. As I've talked on the channel before, I want to see more books about female friendship and the trials and tribulations and beauty of that. And this was definitely that. The things that I found frustrating about it was that because I couldn't sit down and read it all in one block, and also I felt like the text and the plot was so packed in, it was quite overwhelming to sit down and read it in one sitting. But when I sat down and read it in several sittings, there's so many characters and there's so many plot twists, it was actually really hard to remember what happened before. So I found the thread of it to be a little bit hard to follow. And because I think this is quite a unique book, it was hard for me to have expectations of what would happen at the end. And the end wasn't particularly satisfying for me as a reader, but I still enjoyed the journey, and I enjoyed thinking about all the characters, and some of the scenes have really stayed with me, and I keep thinking about them and the implications of what might happen if you were a time traveller and your partner wasn't. And I think the concept is really cool, and I think it's a really well written book. So if you do want to pick it up, I wanted to make sure that you knew it existed, because I hadn't heard about it until I found it in a shop and was like, oh, and then because I'm on a no-buy, Craig bought it for me as a present. Thanks, Craig. But yeah, that is The Psychology of Time Travel. Oh, and it also talks about the mental health. That's quite a big thread for it. Why did you forget to say that, Lena? This is just a light-hearted one that I wanted to say existed. This is Bambert's book of missing stories. I've read this several times in my life. I've bought this book several times in my life because I keep lending it to people and they don't give it back, which I think is a good sign. It means that it's a good book to steal from me. It is translated from German, and it follows Bambert, who is born with a bone deficiency, and as a result is a very, very short man. He has had a attic converted above a shop that has all of his needs and wants catered for. Everything is in his size, and he lives an interesting, intellectual but quite lonely life. Bambert loves to write. He would love to be a published writer, and one day he decides to put all of these short stories he's written into envelopes and erase the names and locations of each story. He puts each one in a lantern and sends it out into the night with a note on each lantern saying, please send back this story to me if you find it, and put your own location and character names in the story. So it is a short story collection of 12 fairy tale fable feeling stories, but aren't based on any fairy tales you've heard before. They're really original little stories, and they're framed by this narrative of like Bambit waiting for each letter to come back, and when he does get one back, he's really excited and reads the new location and characters in the story as we do. He also sends out one blank letter, no story, and wants to see if a new story will come back to him. And if you want to know what that story was, you're gonna have to wait and read the book. Yeah, I've read this book a few times. It's one of my favourite translated little books. I guess it's supposed to be for kids, but it doesn't particularly say that on the book, and I really like it, and I think it has a really like enchanting, whimsical, like interesting take on the short story collection, so I really like it, and I'd recommend it. Also, if you're trying to read more translated books this year, this one is a great one, and it's really short. Speaking of short stories, the first book I read this year, I think will be my favourite one. I was like, literally like, book one, I was like, we're done for the year, guys. I can make my roundup. This is A Guide to Being Born by Ramona Osbel. Jen Campbell gave this to me about 4 years ago. And it was one of those things that I was like, this sounds great. And I really trust Jen's recommendations, but for some reason, never got round to... is that man coming into my house? No. Good. I'm just going to read them back to you to demonstrate the kind of breadth and wealth of these stories. So there's 11 stories in total. A pregnant teenage girl believes she will give birth to a number of strange animals rather than a human baby. An expectant father wakes up to find that small drawers have appeared in the centre of his chest. A girl discovers a ghost of a Civil War hero living in the woods behind her house. The parents of a severely disabled daughter must decide whether to perform surgery that will keep her from growing. Two siblings take their place in a family story that is mostly fictional. These stories are about the moments when we pass from one part of life into another, about the love that finds us in the dark and pulls us finally through. The writing in this is the kind of writing that I would love to be capable of one day doing. Like, listen to this line. Karen closed her eyes and watched the bright shapes behind her eyelids and listened to Reggie breathe and repeat his name like this was the last minute of his life, and he wanted the universe to remember him. He wanted to prove that he was here, that in a world of Andrews and Marcuses and Tyrones, he was a Reginald, in a line of great Reginalds, and this moment was no different. This moment was a flag he was staking in the ground, so that it might wave in all manner of future winds. Who can write like that? What the fuck? I kind of hate the divide between commercial and literary fiction when it comes to how good the writing actually is and what quality is, as I've ranted about many times on this channel before. But if I was going to point to a book, an example of a book that was like, this is good writing, this is technically good. If you break down the structure of the stories, you can prove that it's good, but it's also so readable and likeable and interesting and has pacing and plot and actual believable characters. God, why don't more people talk about this writer? Why isn't she won more prizes? I'm all confusion. I'm all ears. Excuses, world, now. Anyway, passionate. What was I say? I'm a passionate person. Bambit's Book of Missing Stories. Blah 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 blah. Yes. Lastly, Sally Rooney, Normal People. She came, she read, she cried. I tried to read Conversations with Friends by the same writer, Sally Rooney, a while ago, and it wasn't for me. Without really going into it, because I think it's more like personal taste than anything, but I didn't like the tone. I think the characters were unlikable in an unintentional way, not in an intentional, like, unreliable narrator way. And I just felt that the tone was really off, the pacing was really off, and I stopped reading it because I was just like, this isn't aimed at me, or maybe it was aimed at who I thought I was, but I am not this person. But I picked up Normal People with mixed expectations because I heard so much good stuff about it, but I felt like I'd been brought down a few notches by my disappointment in Conversations with Friends. That ended up being a perfect frame of mind to enter Normal People with, because what I found when I opened the book was a raw, believable, beautiful, winding love story. And that, to me, that was all it was. There was some like levels of like class commentary and like other things that were being weaved into it, and slight commentary happening on those things, but mainly a beautiful sweeping love story set in Ireland between two people from different class backgrounds who don't know who the fuck they are. And I think some people get frustrated at their characters. They're like, why didn't they just say what they meant? Why didn't they just clarify their points of view? And I'm like, one, lol, no plot if that happens. Literally the most age-old nature of a book. And it also, like, in the ways that the characters didn't say what they were supposed to be saying and didn't act in the way that was obviously the way they could have solved their own problems, was so recognisable to me. It was an awkward book. The sentence structures in so many places were impeccable. The sweeping way that their love story connects and disconnects, and it feels like painful when they're apart, even though you don't even like know them. And I don't know, I found it really visceral and like, oh, I feel weird because it's in so many ways closer to commercial fiction than I think people make out, and closer to just a rom-com than people make out. But I loved it for that, and I'm really excited to read anything that Sally Rooney writes because she's completely won me over as a reader. I know she's got another one called Mr. Salary that I might read at some point, but if you're somebody who didn't get on with conversations with friends for whatever reason, and you're a hopeless romantic like me, I would very much encourage you to pick up Normal People. That's all from me, folks. Them's the books I've been reading so far in 2019. What have you guys been reading? Let me know in the comments below, because I am always looking to add books to my TBR. If you liked this video and the other videos on my channel talking about consumerism and feminism, promoting careful thinking and good books, you can like this video, share it with a friend to support, or you can become my favourite today by joining the Gumption Club. The Gumption Club is a Patreon only group. It's where you can add me on Goodreads if you want, so you can see what I'm reading real time, bespoke book recommendations for you if you're looking for a particular book. You get access to 200 videos that aren't actually on this channel publicly, they're just for my Patreons, my Gumption Club members, loads of stuff. Oh, and a free poetry collection that you get when you sign up. Join. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Frog Snug out.